They don't say it outright. They may not even know it themselves. But for the avoidant, love doesn't always feel like freedom. It often feels like danger. So instead of leaning into closeness, they reach for something else: control. And here's the heartbreaking truth. Many avoidants mistake control for love, not because they're cruel, but because of the way their nervous system was shaped. Control masquerading as safety. To understand why avoidants equate control with love, we need to go back to the roots. Love, in their earliest memories, was not steady. It was unpredictable, sometimes warm, sometimes cold, sometimes safe, sometimes rejecting. This inconsistency leaves a mark. A child doesn't have the words for it, but their body feels it. Their nervous system records it. So they learn, very young. Closeness is not dependable. Love can hurt. Needing too much will push people away. That lesson becomes a survival map. And that map follows them into adulthood. When an avoidant grows up, they don't simply fear intimacy. They fear the power it has over them. Because intimacy means risk. It means they could lose control. And when you've been wired to expect rejection or withdrawal, control feels like the only shield. So instead of leaning into love, they manage it. They ration it. They dictate the terms. Not out of malice, but out of survival. Think of how this shows up in their relationships. They might pull away after a weekend of closeness. They might avoid deep conversations unless they initiate them. They might give affection in small doses, just enough to keep you near, but never enough to feel fully exposed. This doesn't feel wrong to them. To them, this feels like balance, like safety, because if they can control the flow of intimacy, they won't drown in it. If they can decide when to engage and when to retreat, they won't feel swallowed whole. If they can love on their own terms, they won't risk the humiliation of needing someone and being let down. Here's the paradox. The avoidant genuinely wants connection, but the way they approach it makes connection feel one-sided. To the partner, it feels like walls. It feels like distance. It feels like rejection. But to the avoidant, it feels like love. Because in their nervous system, love without control equals danger. This is why many avoidants are drawn to partners who are deeply emotional. The partner feels what the avoidant cannot. The partner expresses what the avoidant hides. But at the same time, that very emotional depth threatens them. So they regulate it. They dampen it. They put boundaries around it. Not because they don't care, but because they believe, if I don't control this closeness, I will lose myself inside it. Think of the language avoidants often use. I just need space. I can't be smothered. I feel trapped. Behind those words is a body that feels unsafe. The moment it can't control the pace of intimacy, it isn't that they don't love you. It's that their version of love is always filtered through control. Control becomes their compass, their silent language of safety, their shield against vulnerability. But here's the cost. When love is managed, it never reaches its depth. When affection is rationed, it never feels nourishing. When vulnerability is controlled, it never feels real. So while the avoidant believes they're protecting themselves, they're also starving themselves of the very closeness they long for. Imagine it like this. You invite them into a warm embrace. They step halfway in, but keep one arm braced against your chest. They feel close enough to say they're connected, but not close enough to let you all the way in. That's what control looks like in love. Halfway closeness, conditional safety, connection wrapped in distance. For many avoidants, this isn't even conscious. They don't wake up and think, I will control my partner today. It's automatic. It's built into their nervous system. It's the only way they know how to survive intimacy. Because their earliest blueprint said, Love without control equals pain. So to them, control feels like care. Control feels like wisdom. Control feels like love. But here's the tragedy. To the partner who loves deeply, control feels like rejection. It feels like indifference. It feels like they're not allowed to give their whole heart. So both people are in pain. The avoidant feels safe but distant. The partner feels close but unseen. And the very control that keeps the avoidant safe is the same thing that keeps real love just out of reach. Control is the avoidant's survival language, but it is also their prison, because until they see it for what it is, they will keep mistaking control for love. And in doing so, they will miss out on the freedom and intimacy they secretly long for. Why control feels safer than love? For most people, love is supposed to feel like freedom, like trust, like release. But for the avoidant, love without control feels like walking into fire, not because they don't care, not because they don't want intimacy, but because intimacy awakens the one thing they've worked their whole life to escape: helplessness. When you were a child, and the people you depended on were inconsistent, your nervous system learned a painful lesson. Dependence is dangerous. Every hug could be followed by rejection. Every moment of closeness could be followed by withdrawal. Every need could be met with disappointment. So the child begins to adapt, not by leaning in, but by pulling away. They learn, if I stay in control of my closeness, I can't be blindsided by the pain. And that lesson becomes a permanent script. This is why in adulthood, an avoidant can sit next to you on the couch, hold your hand, kiss you goodnight, and still feel a pressing need to retreat the next morning. They fear what love awakens in them, the part of themselves that once depended on closeness and was hurt. That old wound whispers, if you surrender to love, you'll be abandoned. If you lean on someone, they'll let you fall. If you open your heart, you'll regret it. So they armor themselves in control, not knowing that the armor keeps out the very intimacy they long for. Control is the avoidant's survival strategy, but it is also their greatest burden, because control may protect them from pain, but it also robs them of joy. It may shield them from abandonment, but it also isolates them from connection. It may preserve their safety, but it starves their heart. And so they live in tension, longing for love, but terrified of the very thing that could heal them. This is the secret most people don't realize. When the avoidant pulls away, they're not running from you. They're running from the feeling of being out of control, because to their nervous system, control feels safer than closeness. Distance feels safer than dependence, and withdrawal feels safer than love. When control becomes their version of care, most people show love by leaning in, by giving more of themselves, by offering closeness, comfort, attention. But the avoidant shows love differently. They show it by controlling the pace, by limiting the depth, by holding back, not to punish you, but to protect themselves. To them, control doesn't feel selfish. It feels caring. It feels like a way to keep the relationship stable. Think about it. If intimacy overwhelms them, then pulling back feels like prevention, a way of avoiding explosions, arguments, or emotional chaos. So when they withdraw, in their mind, they're protecting both of you. This is why avoidants often think, I need to keep space so this doesn't fall apart. They don't realize that the space itself creates the very cracks they fear. Because while they believe they're preserving the bond, their partner feels rejected, confused, and unwanted. Here's the paradox. To the avoidant, saying no to closeness feels like saying yes to safety. To their partner, it feels like a denial of love. This is where misunderstandings explode. The avoidant thinks they're keeping the relationship safe by holding the walls firm, but their partner experiences those walls as rejection. The avoidant thinks distance equals protection. Their partner feels it as abandonment. The avoidant thinks control equals love. Their partner feels it as indifference. So why does control feel like care to them? Because in their earliest blueprint, care was unpredictable. It was conditional. It came and went. To survive that, they learned to minimize their needs, to not ask for too much, to not get too close, to regulate their own emotions, even if it meant shutting others out. That became their version of responsibility. And later in life, it becomes their version of love. It looks like not texting for days because they think space will prevent conflict. It looks like pulling away after intimacy because they think distance will reset them to safe mode. It looks like avoiding deep conversations because they think too much honesty might shatter the fragile connection. In their mind, this is care. It's their way of keeping things under control. But here's the tragedy. What feels like care to them feels like disinterest to you. What feels like stability to them feels like insecurity to you. What feels like protection to them feels like punishment to you. Control, then, becomes their love language. Not words, not closeness, not vulnerability, but control. Control of timing, control of closeness, control of availability. It's how they say, I love you, but I need to love you in a way that doesn't overwhelm me. The heartbreaking truth, that version of love often leaves their partner starved because real intimacy can't breathe inside walls of control. It requires openness. It requires risk. It requires trust. But to the avoidant, those very things feel life-threatening. So they tighten control, mistaking it for love. This is why so many partners of avoidance say the same thing. They care, I can feel it, but they won't let me in. It's not that the avoidant doesn't care. It's that care, to them, has been fused with control. Control is how they manage their fear. Control is how they protect themselves. Control is how they love, in the only way they know how. And yet, deep down, the avoidant longs for the same thing as anyone else. To be seen, to be safe, to be held without fear. But until they confront the walls of control, their love will always come out distorted, measured, guarded, conditional. Here's the shift. When an avoidant begins to see that real love isn't about control, but about trust, safety, and openness, everything changes. But until then, they'll keep mistaking control for love, even as it leaves them and their partner lonely inside the relationship. The cracks in control. At first, control feels like safety. It feels like certainty. It feels like protection. But over time, control starts to show its cracks. Because love, real love, cannot be controlled. It's not predictable. It's not orderly. It doesn't follow rules. And the more the avoidant tries to box it in, the more love begins to slip through their fingers. Here's what happens. The partner begins to feel starved. They sense the distance. Even if the avoidant swears they care, they feel the walls. Even if the avoidant insists they're still there. And eventually, that hunger turns into resentment. The partner begins to think, why am I always the one reaching? Why do I feel more alone in this relationship than I would if I were actually single? Why do I feel punished for wanting closeness? Meanwhile, the avoidant is fighting a different battle. They notice the partner's hurt. They notice the arguments. They notice the tears. And somewhere inside, they know this is because of me, because of my distance, because of my walls. But instead of softening, many double down. They retreat even further. They cling even tighter to control because admitting the truth that their strategy is failing feels terrifying. If control doesn't keep them safe, what will? This is the tragedy of the avoidance cycle. The very strategy they believe will protect love is the one that slowly erodes it. Control was meant to prevent chaos, but it creates a different kind of chaos, the quiet chaos of disconnection. The cracks begin to show in other ways, too. The avoidant feels a strange emptiness. They get what they thought they wanted: space, freedom, distance. But instead of relief, they feel lonely, isolated, misunderstood. Because deep down, the need for love doesn't vanish. It waits. It aches. It keeps them awake at night. Some avoidants notice this. When a partner finally pulls away, for years, they've controlled the distance. They've been the one to withdraw, to set the pace, to decide how close is safe. But when the partner says, "I can't do this anymore," the ground shifts. Suddenly, they're no longer in control, and the very love they kept at arm's length is slipping away. This is often when panic sets in, because the cracks in control reveal the truth they've been hiding from. They do want closeness. They do want intimacy. They do want connection. They just don't know how to hold it without fear. For some avoidants, this realization comes too late. The partner has already left. The relationship has already fractured. The love they mistook for control is gone. And only in that absence do they see the cost of their walls. But for others, the cracks in control become the doorway to change. When they notice that control isn't keeping them safe, it's keeping them lonely, something begins to shift. They realize that real love isn't about control. It's about surrender. Not surrender in the sense of losing yourself, but in the sense of trusting someone enough to let them in. That shift doesn't happen overnight. It takes courage. It takes patience. It takes relearning what safety actually is. But it begins in the cracks, in the moments when control fails, in the moments when the avoidant finally admits, "This isn't working. I'm losing more than I'm protecting." And here's the deepest truth. Control was never meant to be love. It was meant to be armor. But armor isn't the same as connection. You can't hold someone if you're covered in steel. You can't feel love fully if you're always gripping the reins. At some point, the avoidant must face the cracks in control and ask themselves, "Am I willing to risk love? Or will I spend my life mistaking control for it?" When the walls finally fall, at some point, the walls crack wide open. Not because the avoidant chose it, not because they suddenly woke up one morning and decided to trust, but because life has a way of tearing down what no longer serves. Sometimes it happens through heartbreak. The partner they thought would always stay finally leaves. Sometimes it happens through loss. A parent passes. A friendship dissolves. A family bond is severed. And sometimes it happens quietly. They wake up one day, look around at their carefully protected life, and realize they are safe, but they are alone. This is the moment the walls fall. And when they do, the avoidant feels the very thing they've spent their whole life running from: raw vulnerability, unfiltered grief, the ache of needing someone and knowing they can't control it anymore. At first, it feels unbearable, like their skin is too thin, like their heart is too exposed, like the world is too bright and too loud. They've been trained to believe that this feeling is danger, but it's not. It's the beginning of healing. When the walls fall, a strange thing happens. The avoidant realizes they are human, not the self-sufficient machine they tried to be, not the untouchable island they pretended to be, but a person with a nervous system, with longings, with the same deep need for connection. as anyone else. Of course, this realization doesn't fix everything overnight. There are still reflexes to unlearn, moments of fear, moments of wanting to run. But now, they can no longer deny what was always true. Control is not love. Love is not control. So what happens when the walls fall? If the avoidant is lucky, their partner is still there, still waiting, still hoping. And in those moments, love becomes something different. It's no longer a battlefield. It's no longer a tug of war. It's a place where closeness feels scary, but possible, where trust feels fragile, but real. If the partner is gone, the walls still fall, and that loss becomes the teacher. The avoidant sees, maybe for the first time, what love really requires. Not control, not distance, not power, but presence, tenderness, risk. And this is where the possibility of transformation begins. Because when the walls fall, so does the illusion. The illusion that they are safer alone. The illusion that they can protect their heart by locking it away. The illusion that control is love. What rises in place of that illusion is the truth. Love will always involve risk, but it's a risk worth taking, because no amount of control can replace the warmth of someone who truly sees you. No amount of distance can replace the safety of being held when you need it most. The avoidant begins to learn that dependence is not weakness, that closeness is not a trap, that intimacy is not suffocation. They begin to see that love is not about control. It's about surrendering the illusion of it. This doesn't mean the fear disappears. Healing is not about erasing fear. It's about walking through it without letting it rule you. It's about saying, yes, I'm scared of being hurt, but I want love more than I want control. And maybe that's the lesson we can all take from the avoidant journey. That control feels safe, but it's a cage. That love feels risky, but it's freedom. And freedom is not found in building stronger walls. It's found in letting yourself be seen through them. If you've ever loved an avoidant, this may sound painfully familiar. The distance, the mixed signals, the way they seemed to want you, but couldn't let you close. But know this, behind those walls was never indifference. It was fear. It was pain. It was the only protection they knew. And if you are avoidant yourself, know this too. Your walls kept you safe once. They served a purpose. They protected a child who didn't know how to handle too much pain. But now, those same walls are keeping you from the love you crave. You don't have to tear them all down at once. You don't have to rush. But you can begin with one moment of honesty, with one act of letting someone in, with one small risk of vulnerability. Because here's the truth. The walls you've built are strong enough to protect, but not strong enough to love. And love, the kind that heals, the kind that makes life worth living, will only grow when the walls finally fall. If this spoke to you, take a deep breath and sit with it. Maybe even replay the part that hit hardest. And if you're ready to keep learning, to keep peeling back the layers of avoidant attachment, hit subscribe and stay with me. Because the more we understand these patterns, the more we can finally step out of them and into love that's real,